Okay, we made it to episode 4 here on PAF Universe. And I'm getting some good feedback from you guys and good questions. So keep that coming. And any suggestions for topics or information on pickups in general or PAFs, just make a comment and you might get your answer in an upcoming episode. So I got to keep this one short because I have a bunch of things I need to do. I'm running out of some parts and I have to go spend time in the garage making things. And I have some new plating materials I have to try out and blah 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 blah. It just kind of never ends. When you're self-employed, you never really get away from it. So next week we'll get more in depth into some other subjects, and if you make a suggestion or something, that will help me come up with topics to work through. So this episode, basically, I'm just going to show you a quick clip of me doing prep on my relic covers, and it all starts with polishing prep in preparation for doing nickel plating, and then after that the relic work happens. So it's very intense, and I have this new Chinese brightener to test out in my nickel bath. So that's a deep dive kind of thing. But the rest of it, one thing I wanted to mention is my website is not maintained anymore and hasn't been for a couple years, and it's just too much to try to keep the videos all current and listed. It's just a nightmare, and I've kind of lost track of how to even do that. But there is a few things there worth looking at, like the Dave Hunter interview and shootout that was in a Guitar Player a couple of years ago. He really did a great job on it, and he listened to the things that I told him I needed in order for me to enter into that review. Things that technically needed to be accurate for the review to be worth a darn. And there were 3 other guys in it too, so it benefited all of us. But this episode, I'm going to go over some materials, books and magazines that I've been in, because since I'm not really well known out there, except among the vintage Les Paul purist guys, and but I have been in some pretty important books and magazines and things that I've actually written for magazines that are still out there that you can access to get a little deeper understanding of what I've done and what I'm doing. So like that. Birth Believers, and then Guitar Connoisseur magazine. I wrote a really long article about PAFs and my work and what I discovered and the progression through that. So that's all I'm doing this weekend, and we'll get back to it next weekend and maybe have some more interesting things to discuss, and hope you will suggest topics that you'd like me to go over, and things like that. Meanwhile, I'm thinking about writing a book myself, not giving away any information that pickup guys could profit from, but keeping current with information and knowledge that I have on vintage PAFs that that aren't in any other books because, you know, it's not a big selling topic. You're not going to make $1 million selling a book on PAFs. So that's all for this weekend, and let's get down to it. Thanks for watching. This is one of the first magazines I was ever published in, and it's 20th Century Guitar. It was a really great magazine. Unfortunately, they went out of business years ago. I think this was around 2006. Anyway, these guys were really sweet. They were just the nicest guys. They said they'd heard about what I was doing and would I be interested in writing about it. And I went, well, yeah, I can tell you what I know up to now. I can't tell you everything I'm doing, Don't want to give any secrets away. And they said, okay, yeah, let's do it. And I went, right on, man. So we did. They even did this little nice little graphic in the lower right-hand page there of what the actual magnetic circuit is composed of. You just never see that kind of thing in other books or magazines. This was another early magazine that I was featured in, and this was back when I was making original pickups of my own design, because I didn't want to copy anybody else. I wasn't even interested in making vintage pickups. So they did a really nice write-up on me and my involvement in my graphic design career, having Shrapnel Records and EMG pickups as clients and how I benefited them. And so it boosted my business for a while, and it was really good. Later on, I tried to interest them in an article after I learned a lot about vintage PAFs, and offered to write an article on the technical reasons they sound the way they do and the reverse engineering work I'd done. And they completely were not interested, which was kind of surprising, but Vintage Guitar Magazine's kind of a coffee table book magazine that you pick up and you look at the pictures and maybe read something, but it's show business, and that's what they do. Now, this magazine, this was a big event in my life, in my pickup making life. The author, Dave Hunter, you probably have books of his in your guitar library if you even read about guitar subjects and are fascinated by history as I am. He, in Guitar Player magazine, he wrote an article reviewing a couple guys who claimed to be making PAFs. And you know me, when I see stuff that doesn't work for me, I get annoyed. So I wrote him an email, and I said, I read your article, but the guys that you reviewed, to me, aren't very knowledgeable on the subject of PAFs. And here's what you're missing. And I wrote out this whole list of things that had just weren't true or were, just aggravated me. Anyway, he actually wrote back to me, and I was shocked. And he said, thanks for your email. And he said, you have some really great points. And I was actually thinking about doing a part 2 article. And the things that you wrote to me really resonated. And I wonder if you would be interested in participating, because I want to do a follow-up article. And I said, yeah, with some reservations. And he said, well, what are those? And I said, Well, you're going to be comparing pickups in a stock Gibson Les Paul, and their harness in particular is just bad, not accurate. And if you put my pickups in their harness, it's going to be like putting duct tape over a duck's mouth. And I said, I'll agree to participate if you build a new harness in your Les Paul to my specs, which are the closest you can get to an actual real vintage Les Paul harness. And he agreed. Again, I was shocked. He agreed. So he did it. He built a good replica harness, and then he compared everybody's pickups in it to his guitar rig. And those videos are still on YouTube. You can just look up Dave Hunter. And so he reviewed everybody, and he was very even-handed. He didn't say anything bad about anybody's pickups, except that DiMarzio was part of the review. And he said, these are kind of harsh. So 4 of us got reviewed. DiMarzio was at the bottom, and then there were 2 other guys, and I had sent him my HD 59 and HD PG neck, and he basically said, if you want an expensive but real authentic sounding set, these are the ones to buy. So he didn't exactly say they were the best, you really need to go buy these, blah, blah, blah. He's just not like that. But at the end of the review, one of his friends wrote me and said, Dave was so glad that the review was over so he could put your pickups back in his guitar and go play with his band and jam or whatever. So, and then he bought a set of them for himself after that. So that was really the first PAF shootout that was actually had some controls, and to my knowledge didn't have any hand-wound humbuckers in them, because you can't hand-wind up a PAF replica. It just doesn't work. It's like cutting your own throat. So that really, it boosted my business, but not, I didn't get tons of orders, and I couldn't take them anyway because I don't mass produce back then. I still don't. But it was a really well-written review, and I have it hosted on my sdpickups.com website, and you can go there, look under humbuckers, and you can read the review for my work there. So it was really good. I was so thrilled, and it wasn't just another forum shootout with a bunch of hand winders and all the pickups sounding alike. It was really well done. I recommend you read it. This was another really great thing that happened. Kelsey Alonso back east. I think he's in Miami. We were talking about PAFs, and he's not a Les Paul guy. He's not a vintage PAF guy, but he saw I was getting some attention out there in the pickup world, and so eventually I made him some pickups, etc. And I think we did a trade deal or something where he would let me write as long an article as I wanted to about vintage PAFs. So we did, and boy, did it turn out great. I mean, I wrote about how I started out, how I became fascinated with the PAF subject, and then the steps of learning from the PAFs themselves, from actual scientific reverse engineering, and what that trail led to, and what the steps were. So it's a really long article, and it's the most in-depth thing you will ever read about vintage PAFs, where there's no hype, no BS, and it's all truthful knowledge, but I also don't disclose any of my methods or what I'm doing. So it's the fall 2016 issue, and it's still available on Amazon. And I'd recommend you go buy it, read it, and store it away, because this thing isn't going to be in print forever. And while you're at it, subscribe to the magazine if you want to see some really beautiful guitar designer work out there. Really great magazine. This is the PAF Humbucking Pickup book, From Myth to Reality, by Mario Milan. Quite a big project to put together. There's lots of great photographs in here, a lot of great information, and there were several contributors to the subject, including me. I put in as much completely truthful reverse engineering information into my part of the book as I could without giving away any secrets. The other contributors are all pickup makers, so take it all with a grain of salt. There's marketing going on, and you know how it goes with some of those guys, but it's a great book, and I highly recommend you buy it. Finally, we got Burst Believers 2. And back when they had done Burst Believers 1, they realized there were a lot of other old Les Pauls out there that they hadn't covered. And people kept contacting them and saying, hey, I got one of those. You want some pictures? So they realized they had to do a second version. So I got an email from Vic Dapra and David Plews. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing either one of those right. But they said, could you write a little article for our version 2? I went, well, heck yeah. So in my mind, at that point in my evolution, it was like I was discovering that people didn't really understand vintage PAFs. Most people had never played them, so they didn't have a feel for what they really were. And they're just listening to old recordings, from the 60s and 70s. And most of those recordings are really highly engineered and manipulated. Especially the Beano album 2, the stereo version is really manipulated. That guitar just did not sound like that. And you only realize when you go and listen to the mono version and get a hold of the master tapes CD of it and realize that guitar just didn't sound like most people think it does. So I wrote an article called The Misunderstood PAF and why it was misunderstood, and made my case, and they printed it, and I'm really grateful to have been part of that series. It was a real honor for me. So that's the end of this episode 4, and now I got to go do some work this weekend and try to keep up with things as usual. So thanks for watching, and go see if you can find some of these books. They're a lot of them aren't that well known.